So I want to welcome you to another edition of Life Stories. And today we've got a special guest, as all my guests are special. But I've got Doctor Ada Adigwe, who is not just a medical doctor, but she's also a fashion designer and has her own label. And so we're going to go for her journey, understand how she's combining family life, professional life, and also her aspiring fashion range. So I'm waiting for her to come on in, and we'll start Life Stories. Yeah, I know. As I said, this is Life Stories. I mean, what we've been doing over the past couple of months is really talking to a variety of people from around the world, just getting a sense of their story. Every story is unique, every story is different, but it's also the elements of a story that inspires others. And so for today, for your side, is your story as a medical doctor, as a fashion entrepreneur, as a mother, as a wife. There's a sort of a mixture of things, and then also we're living in times where there's been an awakening of the racism within society. Some of us will feel it more than others based on the type of work that we do. So there's quite a little bit to explore. But I guess we always start off with from the beginning. Is that people always want to know where you're from, where were you sort of born and raised.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, both my parents are Nigerian. I think they came here in the early 70s, early to mid 70s. They had four kids, and we were basically raised here. But then we moved to Nigeria to do our secondary education, and there we got to learn a little bit more of the culture, learn to speak the language as best we could. And then we came back here, to do my A-levels and then to do university. My dad never stayed here for long.
Okay, no, so I think just catching that, what do you think, what difference did it make doing your sort of secondary education in Nigeria? What did you notice about adjusting to that after growing up and raised here and going there? How was that transition?
It was very hard, very, very hard. It's a completely different system of education. It's a completely different system in the way that they do everything. And having to adjust. I mean, I was about 10 and a half, and having to adjust to that without any kind of like forewarning, proper forewarning was quite difficult. When I talk to my brothers and sisters about that, we often joke that we were there for 6 years, and those 6 years seemed to sort of like drag on. They were really slowly paced. But then when we came back here and we stayed here for 6 years, it just flew by quickly. Obviously, I think there were good things that I got out of it. My dad has a huge family out there, and it was nice to get to know them. It was lovely to get to know and know our culture and understand the language, which is something that I think is incredibly important and something that I'm trying to pass on to our kids. It was definitely a big eye-opener. It definitely made me appreciate a lot of what I have, and a lot of the privileges that I've got from my parents, being who they are. It was definitely a big eye-opener. Some positives and a few negatives, but it's definitely been paved the way to me becoming who I am today.
Okay. And you were mentioning that your dad didn't spend as much time here, so having and I'm understanding that he probably had business interests back at home and stuff, and weather and stuff. How was that, having that sort of split family sort of situation?
I think when we were very, very young, my parents, my mother especially, she didn't really, I think she shielded us from a lot. She didn't really explain so much to us. It's only when I think I was in secondary school, I remember my dad saying to us that or, you know, it was very, very tough back then. There was a lot of racism here in England. And, you know, even though he worked very hard and he graduated top of his class here in England, for instance, he couldn't get a job. You know, his other peers, most of them white, did get jobs and he couldn't. So he had to move to Nigeria because of that. And the way they told it, I think they downplayed it a bit, and we didn't really think about the impact of that. And the funny thing is that now, with everything that's happened in the last few months and the awakening that's happened in the last few months, we've revisited that and we've looked at it and we thought, no, hang on a second, it was actually quite meaningful. It was actually the impact it had on us was quite significant, because at the end of the day, we grew up without our father being present all the time, and because of racism, basically. So it's definitely, the last few months has definitely, you know, brought about conversations that we never would have had, probably never would have had otherwise, which has been really important for us. So he moved back to Nigeria when I was about 3 or 4, and then he would come back maybe once a year or every 2 years and visit and stay for maybe a month or so, and then head back there. And then we would go back every few years just to visit him and then come back here. And it's only until it was time to go to secondary school that we actually moved there and stayed with him for 6 years. And then we came back here. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, and then we'll touch on the Black Lives Matter and the impact it's had, greater impact it's had on you a little later. Yeah. So you coming back here and A levels and university, did you find it that you had an advantage coming from the Nigerian system, or was it much of a disadvantage having to relearn the system here?
Oh, a huge advantage. I mean, because the education system there, unless it's tough, but it is advanced. You know, when I came back here, because I did my Cambridge O levels out there and then came back here to do my A levels, I remember sitting in the class and the teachers were looking at me like, where are you from? How do you know all this stuff? And I was like, we've already studied this, we've already done all of this. And, you know, so I found my A levels incredibly easy, which was nice. So those 2 years was really, really nice for me anyway. So even though, like I said, the education system there, it's tough in a way, it definitely prepared me for doing my A levels and then subsequently passing all my exams and then heading to medical school. So yeah.
Okay. And why did you choose medicine?
I've got Nigerian parents. No. I remember, you know what, people ask me that, yeah, and I remember when I was a little girl, my mum bought me this medical kit with the stethoscope and everything, and she said to me, you know, my mum's a nurse, so she said to me, Ada, you're going to be a doctor, aren't you? And I was like, yes, Mummy, I'm really eager to please, you know, yes, Mummy, I am going to be a doctor. And then I moved to Nigeria and I saw how the healthcare system there was and how it was tough being a student. I remember that period of time in Nigeria, I thought to myself, no, I couldn't be a doctor, I couldn't do this, you know. And then I came back here and I did some work experience because my mum's a nurse. She got me some work experience in a GP practice. I got some work experience elsewhere as well. And I looked at it and I thought, nah, this is definitely what I want to do. You know, I'm the kind of person I think I crave on trying to make other people, making a difference and trying to make other people's lives better in however small or bigger way that I can. And I think just the profession I'm in suited that perfectly.
Okay. And so did you then find medical school here, I won't say as easy, but a little bit more straightforward compared to after your experience in Nigeria, or was that an eye-opener?
Yeah. A lot straightforward because there was a lot of structure to it. There wasn't the threat of constant strikes that people back in Nigeria have to face, you know. They do everything that they can to help you pass those exams and succeed and to put the practical aspects into the theoretical aspects of studying as well. So I didn't find medical school difficult, you know. And yeah, I got to meet lots and lots of fantastic people along the way that I'm still friends with today. So it was definitely a wonderful experience. Yeah.
Was it as diverse as it seems like now? Sort of the students that when you started off with a mixture, black and whites, Asians, or what was it like back in those days?
No, back in those days, I mean, we're talking about, when did I go to medical school? In the year 2000. I went to Royal Free and University College in London Medical School, and no, not at all. I mean, I think we were about 400 in the year, and in terms of that number, I think we were about maybe under 10 Black people in the year, which is quite very low, very low. I don't know what the figures are like now. To be honest with you, I haven't looked into it, but I do hope they have improved, because back then it was pretty dire.
But how was it then being, one of 10 Black people in a school? Did you feel it, or were you so driven by what you were doing that you didn't notice? What was it like?
I think I on the grand scheme of things, I didn't notice, but there were obviously the students there and my colleagues then, they were fantastic. And like I said, I've made, lifelong friends there. So from that point of view, I didn't notice. From the point of view of my tutors, I didn't notice. I did notice there was one occasion, for instance, when I think I was about in probably my 5th year in medical school. We had a meeting where they brought patients in, and then we had to talk to the patient. I can't remember for the life of me what we had to talk to this patient about. And then in a group, they divided us into groups. So I think I was in a group of maybe about 10, and I was the only Black person in that group. So after we asked the patient questions and listened to what he had to say, he then turned to me and said something along the lines of, why is it that all these African countries keep having problems? Why can't their countries feed them? Why do they have to keep coming here? And I remember being taken aback by that. And I remember thinking to myself, no, I'm not going to stand for this. And then I did talk back to him and say, what you've said was completely inappropriate. Out of all of us here, you've turned to me to direct that question, and it's got nothing to do with why we're here today. And then the tutor afterwards heard about what happened. He was really, really good. He called me aside, and I think he was Italian or Spanish, and told me about just a little bit snippet about the difficulties he's had coming over to this country and having to adapt as well. And he was really good. It was really nice of him to sort of debrief and help me take a step back and recognize that. I think a majority of my colleagues in that group understood and weren't happy, but I was definitely taken aback by one or two who said to me afterwards that they thought that I overreacted when he said that. And I made them realize that, no, that is not an overreaction. What he said was completely inappropriate. And in fact, my stance on it was an underreaction, looking back on it today. So that was that. I think that was the only negative experience. So out of 6 years, that was the only negative experience I've had, which compared to other people, it's not huge, My only other experience was not in medical school. It was not whilst I was in medical school. It was coming home from medical school, where I think it was my first proper experience of having someone racially attack me. And I think that was when I was about 18 or 19. So I'd first come into medical school, and I was going home on the tube. So I got into the lift at one of the tube stations in central London, and then this white man, probably in his 40s, he had his hands in his pockets, and he looked at me and he started mumbling something, and I couldn't hear what he was saying. So I said to him, excuse me, and then he started mumbling it a bit louder, and I still couldn't hear what he was saying, but the look he gave me was not right. So I stepped back, and so then I went onto the platform, walked to the other end, sat on a bench. There was a white woman beside me, and then just ignored him. We went to the other side of the platform, started mumbling something to people there. They walked away from him, and then he came back to me, stood right in front of me with his hands in his pockets, and he started yelling at me how he hates all Black people and all Black people should go back to Africa, how his boss was Black and he hated his boss. And at that moment, I froze. He was ranting on and on and on. And when I retell this story, I forget everything that he says, because I remember at that point, I just couldn't think, And in that moment, I remember thinking, the only thing I could think was that he has his hands in his pockets. I don't know what he has. Yeah. And the thought of Stephen Lawrence was just running through my mind. I just thought, I just better keep quiet. I just better ignore this. Yeah. But then it was the white woman. who was sitting next to me, who came to my defense. And I could never remember, obviously I didn't really talk to her that much, but I remember her shouting at this guy and saying, how rude, how pathetic. And she just kept going on at him, and I don't know what she said, but then he just stood back, he kept quiet, and he sort of like walked away with his tail between his legs. And then I remember what she said to me. She said something along the lines of, don't ever sing to their level, they're pathetic, they're not worth it, And then the train came, and I just got onto the tube, and then that was it. And looking back on that, it never really impacted on me, because I think my experiences of racism have been relatively small compared to other people. But it definitely, one of the things that I thought about was that it's definitely not about, white versus black. It's definitely about, races versus anti-races. It was this white woman that came to my aid and, defended me, when I couldn't even defend myself. And I've always thought to myself, I would never be in that position again where I would face any kind of racism or racist attack or whatever and not defend myself again, or not stand up for myself. And I've never, ever allowed that to happen. Never.
Oh. I mean, did you relay this story to family and people at the time, or what did you do?
No, I think about it and I think, why? I didn't tell my mum. I went home and I didn't really tell my mum, maybe because I didn't want to worry her, or I didn't want her. I think she was always a little bit nervous about me taking the tube,
Okay.
And I didn't tell my mum, I didn't tell my dad about it. I just kept it to myself. And it was one of those things that I just never really allowed to impact on me in any way, shape or form, I just decided that he wasn't worth it. People like that are just not worth it. And I just continued with everyday life. I can't remember if I really discussed it. I mean, even in the wake of the last few months, I can't remember if I discussed it with my siblings or not. But no, I just kept it to myself and just moved on, really. I just thought to myself, I would never let that kind of racism affect me in any way, shape or form.
Now, I guess looking back then, if there are two ways. Yeah, one, you could have, you could. I think if it happens nowadays, there is there's the law which is protection, which could protect, and he would have been arrested. But the one thing you mentioned, his hands were in his pockets, train station. Yeah. It could have turned violent, especially it's very people are racist, but to verbally come out in public and do that, it takes a degree of courage, almost a degree of fearlessness to do that. I mean, people are very closet racist, so I probably I probably would have been much more as guarded as well, not trying to, not knowing that what's he trying to provoke, what's the bigger picture. Is he waiting for me to attack and bring out a knife, self-defense and things like that? But I guess I'm wondering though, did that experience make you stronger, or did it make you bitter? Were you always observant about watching everything anyone says? Because you mentioned about the patient. Was this playing in your mind when the patient talked about Africa? Did you think about this guy?
I think with those two instances, I think the one that probably impacted me more was the patient, okay? Because I don't know, I think I had to sort of speak up myself, and the fact that some of my colleagues took what I said as an overreaction, that was hurtful at that time. But again, I just didn't let that impact on me. The racists at the train station, I didn't let that impact on me at all, not even in the slightest. It was one of those things. It was one of those things that I've always heard about it. I always knew that obviously that racism existed, but it was the first time that I'd ever experienced anything like that. And I think my parents, especially my mother, always taught us to be strong and to not be held back by other people or what other people's opinions are of us, and to push that aside and be who we want to be, that who we are in future is determined by only one person, and that's ourselves, So he was insignificant and still is.
Yeah, no. So, well, I think one of the questions I wanted to find out, and I did ask about what your experience going to secondary school in Nigeria had on you. I went to secondary school in Nigeria, had my primary school here in the UK, went to university in America. But when they were, and I lived in the South in America, and when they were experiencing a lot of their sort of subtle racism and stuff in the South, it didn't affect me because to me it was like, goodness, I could have gone to university in Nigeria, so I saw this as paradise. So I had a different mentality, and I wondered how much being in Nigeria, knowing history and roots and culture, that I didn't have the baggage that they have of civil rights and your parents and grandparents. So hence I'm wondering, when you have people who might have been racist to you over here, it didn't impact you as much because you already knew your family. You have a very different mentality, and I just wondered if you hadn't gone to Nigeria, would you think it would have impacted you differently?
I'm not sure that going to Nigeria did or would have. When it comes to racism, I don't think it would have done. I think being in Nigeria has definitely impacted me in other ways. It's made me it's made me realize, how lucky I am, and how fortunate I am to have the things that I do have, and be surrounded by the family that I am. It's made me fortunate to realize that I do have a family out there, and a wonderful family out there, that we have a wonderful history out there. The culture itself is wonderful. It's beautiful, like I'm sure you are fully aware of. But when it comes to racism, obviously I didn't experience, I didn't see it out there, so it wasn't, I think if I had probably been here, had my secondary school education here, I would have been more clued up on racism. I think living in Nigeria and then coming here at the age of 16, and then going to university at 18, I think looking back then, I was very, very naive as to the racism that did exist. I remember I had another medical student out there. He was black back then, and he'd obviously grown up in this country. He was Nigerian as well, grown up in this country, never lived in Nigeria. And he seemed to be a lot more clued up on racial issues than I was. And I'd like to say that I learned a lot from him, but didn't really. So I think in a way, I was definitely very, very naive back then. Probably a little bit more in uni than I had been, but then I think I've definitely learned a lot in the years from then, and definitely learned a huge in the last few months.
Okay.